What's up, everyone? This is my promised YAP video regarding the fronting Alpha 100 solo for Diaspora. Um, just going to play through with a random, not exactly random, but slightly adjusted grid from the ones suggested on the wiki and stuff, just so I can talk through my thought processes for the solo and kind of get prompted by some things that may happen in the fight as to discussion points. So we're going to do that at the same time. As I mentioned in the description of the video itself, there's a decent amount of flexibility in the grids in terms of what the actual weapons are. The main focus points are having healing cap, some type of garrison, and supplemental damage, both skill and generic via pillar drivers or world enders. You're going to get to Alpha 100 first, pretty much anyway. You have to be a little bit careful. Like, I wouldn't use Sagacity Key, for example, because there are definitely times where I've been fairly close on Beta 100 compared to Alpha 100, just depending on, weird mirror image, RNG, things like that. But effectively, since you know that you're going to have Alpha hit 100, you want to scale the other types of damage, summon, skill, and Ogi as best you can. One of the obviously annoying parts about Diaspora Full Auto is the amount of RNG. So as you can see here, Tigers has a little bit of extra native hostility, which means there are situations where you fail a trigger, Tiger gets hit with most, if not all, of the boss's attacks, and all of a sudden, things get spooky pretty quickly. I'm not too scared about any of the triggers in phase 1 really killing anyone. If you are worried, especially like in early turns like this, as a friendly reminder, Kame does have a couple of hostility up EMPs. I don't take these normally because I don't want to disturb hostility for like most of the other fights where there are multi-hit attacks, but if you've noticed that you're bumping into situations like these where Tiger is taking inordinate amount of damage compared to everyone else, then you can take, a point or two in Kame hostility. One thing that I noticed while doing testing for this is over the course of the fight, if RNG is poor and you fail a lot of triggers, Raziel actually ends up being the one that's closest to death most of the time. Part of why I even ended up going with putting Bahamut in the grid, for example, was because I had a couple of runs where, I thought the run would succeed, and then Raziel dies to burn like the turn before Lucy came up, so I ended up putting Bahamut in the grid. This time I'm trying with Galleon instead. I realized for most of the time that one turn wasn't going to make much of a difference, and that was when I was still, not as sure about what the grid needed to focus on. Like, that may have been a run where I was using or trying to use Galleon staves, for example, which just in the long run isn't enough defense over the course of the fight. Whereas Garrison, you can see Tigers has been gaining health steadily back from their, supposedly dangerous position. They're getting their health back steadily. In phase 2, all of the triggers, if you fail, are just an even spread AoE damage across the board, so you don't have to worry about one of your characters getting picked off by phase 2 omens going poorly. But here in phase 1, there is that slight danger here and there. Looking at the wiki, and big thanks to AGT for putting that together, because I'm not wiki adjustment savvy enough. I feel like I would break something if I tried to change too much there. Is he ended up helping and doing a lot of testing in separate grids. You don't really need, for example, you don't really need xcal. Like I put in the previous grid, I was trying to make it as easy as possible to do. So you'll notice in the Primal video itself, I was using like Selenos. I was using healing cap on Ultima instead of the Tico staff. I do really like this weapon, especially for this fight, because big healing cap is very nice. I mean, the numbers, like the grid on the left here has a lot of... it switched back, sorry. But the grid for the current fight, which is this one in the center here, aside from like slight differences in supplemental damage and stuff, the main difference is the healing cap difference. Healing cap does a lot more than you think over the course of the fight. I really wish that the post-game stats had healing measured in some way, which, it's not damage, so I get it would be annoying to measure, especially with overcapping and stuff, but healing is more effective HP when you have higher defense, so the amount of extra survivability it gives you it can't be understated. I wouldn't try one of these if I didn't have any healing weapons in the grid. For that same token, the main reason that we use Lobelia backline instead of Uriel is because of all the buffs that he provides from his backline passive. We have to get to a certain number of buffs for the Kame Spear refresh to trigger. So, and we wouldn't be hitting those with just cards aside from very specific turns when like Raziel's skill 2 is up, for example, if we didn't have Lobelia backline. So he's a really big source of healing on his own insofar as he triggers the Kame Spear. When I was doing testing, there's a lot of different things I tried. I didn't do much research looking at myself as far as for what other, full auto attempts and stuff look like. I didn't want to get too tunnel vision on trying to adjust what already existed. So I was kind of playing around with it a lot myself, which is part of why, even after we were talking about, oh, could this be done? Like, what does a grid like this look like? I took a while to actually get it to a point where I was comfortable with it, partially because of all the RNG and stuff that the fight has. So, a run might look good 3 times in a row, and then you test it a couple more times, and it looks really bad the next 2 or 3 times in a row. So trying to find something that was effective for a long range of runs was something that I was more interested in over just like, is this possible? I tried some really kooky setups. Like I tried seeing if you could go to Y100 with like Silva and Grand Eugen frontline. Eugen has his own kind of pseudo hostility buff in his skill 1 to try and get his HP a little bit lower naturally during the course of the first phase. And then, his auto ignition, and same thing with Silva's, like pumping out as much damage as possible in the Ogi direction, and then having them die off, kind of going into phase 2, and then going with more of an auto-based setup from there. The difficulty is, at that point, you can have Raziel stacks and stuff partially built up, but if you have Kame come in, or I should say, if you have Tigers come in, then Tiger Tape isn't really built up. But if you don't, Tigers have all the hostility after that, and they end up being... I found Tigers were in danger, but the main problem is that if you go with the Y100 route, despite how much easier it is to do a lot of auto attack damage in terms of, consistent damage over the course of the fight, making it faster, you have to deal with so many more of the boss's omens or, full diamond effects that you just end up with way, way, way more chances for RNG to go against your favor and cause you to die. When you fail a trigger or fail a full diamonds, you get 1 turn of respite between it filling its diamonds back up again in Y100. With Alpha 100, you get 2, and you get 1 in between normally. So, initially, and you saw in the video, I used the self-reflection, which is the buff that lets MC, it drains 30 bar, removes debuffs, quote unquote. Obviously, Diaspora's debuffs aren't removable, but it lets you proc a dispel every turn and the tiger damage every turn. Now, I found that to be good for effective speed, or effective survivability, but as you can see with the wiki, we decided on putting in Rage 3 and turning off Kame's skill 3 because it was doing a lot of extra clicks that really weren't needed. Like I did prefer, knowing exactly, like, okay, even if you're gonna have the 24 million omen on turn 6, and then no matter what happens on turn 7, you're gonna have, that's exactly the turn that Raziel's skill 3 becomes usable, so you're always going to solve that omen. I liked the consistency of some of those things, but at the end of the day, having all those extra clicks that you don't really need was slowing the run down, and we kind of wanted to trim it a little bit from, a 25 to 26 minute solo down to a 22 or so minute solo, which is, quite a difference over the course of the time. I also, wanted to mention, it prompts that Belial as a replacement for Baja. I think you're probably okay with, I really do think Galleon will work there. There's probably some other, like, slight variation you could do that I'm just not thinking of right now. But the main thing is you probably don't want to put Orologia there. I would really not be surprised. I don't really want to test it, but I really would not be surprised if that extra large chunk of skill damage right at the start of the fight could put you in a position where beta is a little bit higher of a gauge than you want it to be. Same reason why I mentioned, Sagacity. I was almost hesitant to put in 2 World Enders for a little bit because I was slightly worried, but after having tested a few times, I do really like the supplemental damage. And the damage cap is fine, mostly in any case. Skill damage cap anyway, you can see from the current grid that's being used, it's at 93.05, which is also before, now this is with Galleons, it's a little bit adjusted, but this is before counting that Tigers are also benefiting from the World Harp here. The Tigers do a majority of the skill damage in this run, which is why I picked the one that would affect them over the one that would affect MC. Not only do they get the extra attack or the extra skills from their own clicks, but getting them from the MC skills as well, and their post-auto skill nuke means they're doing, by far and away, as you saw in the post-fight of the last video, that Tigers are doing an overwhelming amount of the damage. So giving them the skill amp is more beneficial. I partially like this setup too because it means that I don't have to change off of my glory key still on my Opus. I know a lot of the, it's obviously not meta to do right now, but I don't do Phase 0 often enough to want to change keys back and forth a lot, and I find that the glory key helps me with, generic hexa runs and stuff, so I don't have to worry too much about that part of the gauntlet. I don't have to worry too much about the start of Phase 0 hitting the CA trigger there as well. When I get more of my opuses done, I might come back and test a little bit more, but you can see also from the alternate grids that we're using the Shalom weapon, which has the large glory and the special Ogi cap, because, as I said, you know that you're going to hit Alpha 100, so then it becomes scaling the other damage types as best as possible to make the run faster and more consistent. Because of the nature of the RNG as well, going toward 30, it is possible to have issues with the 30% trigger due to the potentially different timing with Tiger's skill 3. They reduce that cooldown when they Ogi, but sometimes they double Ogi more often, less often. Sometimes you get petrified a bunch of times, and so you have that timing pushed back a lot in the first place. So you see, right now we're fine because they cast it just barely beforehand, but you have a situation where you don't have any Ogis ready and Tigers aren't even attacking that turn, and then all of a sudden, you aren't even doing 30 million damage that turn. So it is nice to be able to scale the other damage types so that your Ogis can help cover that distance, for example. Another thing regarding the Magna grid, and I mentioned this in the Magna one as well, but you really, really need to use the pillar drivers. Your auto attack's only doing 80k, just doesn't cut it. You definitely won't make the time. One of the nice things, even though the auto attack damage itself is reduced, the echoes are still kind of based off. They still hit for their obviously reduced amount, but they still benefit fully from the supplemental. So characters like Razio, and you'll see MC there as well, are doing multiple hundreds of thousands of damage, where they could be doing barely 200,000 if it was a 100,000 damage auto and then 10,000 damage echoes. So having the supplemental really keeps the total damage consistent. And of course, it benefits skills and stuff too, so that's nice. One thing I will say, unfortunately, I really would not attempt to do this without runting. As sad as it is that, runting is really fun, but for some things like this, it really is going to be required. I know that there's a little bit of a sore spot in needing illustrious or other types of weapons, especially from what I've understood. A lot of the JP content creators get kind of flack for using, weapon A or weapon B, and their audience wanting them to go, well, I don't have this. What do I do? I don't have that. What do I do? Which is part of why I'm making this video too, is just to talk through some alternatives. But sometimes, the amount of convenience of full autoing the most difficult on LE raid that currently exists in the game, there are going to be some stringent requirements. In our case, character-wise, I really don't see a way that you could replace any of these characters for it to work either. It's unfortunate, but there are other content creators that have, for example, I think there's a Y100 full auto where he manages with he uses Silva to trade in for Monica, and then uses Monica to help Ogi loop consistently, that it clears hits and debuffs based on the characters that are there. So there are other, potential setups that can do a full auto Diaspora, but in terms of this type of grid and setup in Alpha 100, I don't think you can do it without runting. That's just, and these characters, that's just how it is. Yeah, I guess I wanted to show, because there's several, like I said, there's several variations you can make to the grid. This is kind of a strange, crit variant, for example, but it's nice because you get to keep kind of similarly with your supplemental damage, because of the Tiger Claws giving you an extra 20k here, along with the skill cap that you'd be missing from going down to 1 world ender. You do still get some stam and some healing cap from the Christmas Antheria book. So a lot of the check boxes are hit fairly well from this. You have stam, you have healing cap, and you have supplemental. And that's kind of part of the point. It's the same reason why the Seagaxes over here are so important. You'll have a harder time with consistency if you don't have, if you don't have enough defense, you could very easily fail a trigger and have like 2 failed triggers in a row and they both give you burn, and then you're potentially in trouble. Petrify isn't as scary with the post-auto skill nukes, but it still stops you from, getting refresh from Raziel Ogi. It stops you from keeping your debuff supplied as well with Tiger's skill 1, because if they get 2 triggers in a row and Veil ends up being further back in the enemy's buff order, you could be dealing with a situation like, what was one of the ones I failed? It was when I was in testing, it was almost succeeded, but it got like Veil, Double Strike, and Echoes. And I cast several debuffs into the Veil twice in a row. MC wasn't doing, the boss wasn't at 12 debuffs, so MC wasn't able to do the post-auto nuke, and it just kind of snowballed. Let me talk about MC skills for a bit, because I plan on talking about that, and then I forgot to mention it. So, I obviously need a red and a yellow skill. I did have setups where I would use 3 red skills. I think I was using the Onmyoji debuff skill, this Shikigami, as a skill as well to help Raziel stack more quickly. If you have 3 red skills and then you had, for example, I had self-reflection at that time, you're able to stack Tigers really, really fast, which is nice for like overall damage. However, at that point, until Tigers get fully stacked up, and even then, you kind of sit around 10 or 11 debuffs unless unless you manage to hit this foe special attack damage is lowered stackable, which unfortunately it doesn't happen super, super often. All these other debuffs you're already accounting for with your current play. So part of the reason why I chose against that was because at that time my quick summon was for Hallenmel, which is nice from a consistency standpoint because they give you more data, things like that. But unfortunately, that means that you're not quick summoning Lucifer, which means you're way more prone to die to RNG because you have significantly less sustain. Another reason why I picked Miserable Mist over, say, Rain of Arrows is because I wanted to have the turns offset as best as possible in terms of being able to clear a debuff omen. So Chaos Ruler gets 1 turn to skill cooldowns, and then 1 turn to debuff skill cooldowns. So what this means is that now my Stall 3, my Miserable Mist, and my Bleak Disorder are all kind of offset because you've got 5, 4, and then 3 for the cooldown timings. Of course, they're going to line up eventually. That's just how multiplication works. But the way that the omens get spaced, whether you succeed or fail, means that you can't know that you're always going to have an omen on, say, turn 8 or turn 9. Because if you fail both turn 3 and turn 6 or turn 7, then you might not have an omen until turn 10. So having that spread of more likely to line up turns where your skills are available to cast more debuffs is really good. Looking at a generic turn in that MC could do either 3 or 6 debuffs, but let's pretend MC does 6. Raziel does 2, which means 8. And then Tigers does either a triple attack for 9 or does an Ogi and applies 2 debuffs for 10, which either way is short of 11. So having missed with 2 debuffs means that there are going to be turns where you missed and then are able to do the remaining 9 debuffs just normally, and that will cover you for an 11 debuff trigger. So just little things like that that you don't really notice, or that it's hard to see over the course of, maybe 5 fights. But, and I'm not doing this now just because it's a lot to watch a full auto go on for 20 plus minutes 6 times a day for, more than like a week or 2 straight. But while I was testing that, I was seeing the differences that were happening, whether it was making the difference or not, I should say, in how it was landing. Well, anyway, so I'm going to end the video here. I'm not going to make you guys listen to me ramble anymore or watch another full run. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. I'm happy to answer anything that happens. I don't check this YouTube because I have, 2 YouTube accounts. One that I have all my preferences stuff on, like on my phone. But then this is the one that I make videos on that I use on my computer. So I may not get to you immediately, but I'm going to try to do my best to answer any questions or concerns you guys may have. Again, I wouldn't try this without runting, so sorry. Even just from a damage taken over time perspective, the just natural bosses damage over time being limited is pretty important. So with that, I will let you all go and have a nice day.